You know that feeling when you're sitting right next to someone you care about and somehow you still feel alone? The conversation is happening, plans are being made, maybe there's even laughter. But inside, there's this quiet sense of fading into the background, like you're present but not fully perceived. You listen carefully, you adapt, you make space. And yet, something in you keeps wondering what it would feel like to be deeply noticed without having to work for it. Most people don't talk about this feeling. When they do, it's often dismissed. You're just overthinking. You're too sensitive. Or worse, it gets framed as neediness, as if wanting to be seen is some kind of flaw. But it isn't. There's a particular kind of person who becomes almost invisible in relationships, and it's rarely because they lack depth, personality, or value. In fact, it's often the opposite. They're perceptive, attuned, emotionally intelligent. They sense shifts in tone before words are spoken. They anticipate needs before they're expressed. And over time, they become so skilled at reading others that they quietly stop expecting to be read themselves. This isn't about being dramatic or insecure. It's about something more subtle. The psychology of people who feel invisible in relationships is layered, and there's more happening beneath the surface than most people realize. When someone consistently feels unseen, it's often tied to how their nervous system learned to operate in connection. Research in attachment theory shows that early relational experiences shape how we orient toward closeness. If, growing up, attention felt unpredictable, warm one moment, withdrawn the next, a child adapts. They become observant, careful. They scan for cues. Neuroscience tells us that the brain's threat detection system, particularly the amygdala, becomes finely tuned in these environments, not because the world is always dangerous, but because unpredictability feels unsafe. So the nervous system learns, pay attention, adjust quickly, don't cause waves. Over time, this turns into a relational style. You become the easy one, the understanding one, the flexible one. And it works. Relationships form. Conflicts are minimized. You're appreciated for being calm, supportive, low maintenance. But there's a quiet trade-off. When your focus is always outward, reading, anticipating, stabilizing, your internal world doesn't always get mirrored back. And feeling seen, psychologically speaking, requires mirroring. It requires someone noticing your subtle shifts, your unspoken disappointments, your small joys. If that didn't happen consistently early on, you may have learned not to expect it or not to ask for it. There's also something behavioral science highlights: reinforcement patterns. If, in your past, expressing needs led to withdrawal, irritation, or being overlooked, your brain encodes that information, not consciously, implicitly. The body remembers, so you minimize, you downplay, you tell yourself it's not a big deal. Eventually, you become so practiced at self-containment that others assume you don't need much at all. And that's where invisibility begins. It's important to say this clearly. This pattern is not a weakness. It's an adaptation, a sophisticated one. You learned how to maintain connection by reducing friction. You learned how to keep relationships stable by being emotionally steady. That takes intelligence. It takes restraint. It takes strength. Different people solve the same relational puzzle in different ways. Some move toward intensity, some toward independence, some toward attunement. None of these are inherently better. They're simply strategies the nervous system adopts to feel secure. The person who feels invisible often carries a paradox. They are deeply attuned to others, but disconnected from the experience of being attuned to. They are reliable, but rarely leaned into. They are calm, but rarely comforted. And here's the counterintuitive layer. Sometimes invisibility is reinforced precisely because you handle so much so well. People trust your resilience. They assume you're okay. Your steadiness becomes your disguise.
There's also a subtle dynamic at play in long-term relationships. Humans naturally calibrate effort based on feedback. If you rarely signal dissatisfaction, rarely escalate, rarely demand attention, the other person's brain registers stability. Not neglect, just equilibrium. Without intentional awareness, the relationship can drift into a pattern where your emotional interior stays largely unexamined. And the quiet cost of that pattern is loneliness in proximity. But there's also a hidden strength. People who have learned to be invisible in relationships often possess extraordinary emotional literacy. They understand nuance. They notice micro-expressions. They feel atmospheres shift before anyone else does. That capacity, when paired with self-awareness, becomes powerful. Because once you begin to turn even a fraction of that attunement inward, noticing your own needs, your own disappointments without minimizing them, something shifts. Invisibility is not an identity. It's a role your nervous system rehearsed for a long time. And roles can evolve. It doesn't require becoming louder or demanding or fundamentally different. Often it begins with something smaller, allowing your internal experience to count as much as the environment you're monitoring. There's a difference between being low conflict and being low visible. There's a difference between being understanding and being unseen. If you felt this, it makes sense. It didn't appear out of nowhere. It was shaped, reinforced, practiced. Your brain did what it was designed to do, protect connection in the best way it knew how. You are not broken for wanting to be noticed without having to perform for it. You are not dramatic for wanting someone to ask what's wrong before you decide whether it's worth mentioning. You are not too much for wanting reciprocity and emotional effort. Your way of relating carries depth, it carries steadiness, it carries care. And those qualities have value. They always did. The shift isn't about abandoning who you are. It's about letting yourself occupy space inside the relationship you're already sustaining. If some part of this felt familiar, there's likely more beneath it. Patterns like this rarely exist in isolation. They tend to connect to other quiet adaptations, the way you handle conflict, the way you approach closeness, the way you interpret silence. And understanding those layers doesn't change you overnight. It simply makes you visible to yourself. And that's often where everything else begins.